I clearly would like to see more of that. I look forward to discussing with her as we approach the manifesto writing process about how we can best deliver that. Thank you, Mr. Betts.
Order, order. We now move on to the next debate.
Ah, you're right. Oh, David.
Right, request everyone to leave quietly, please, so we can get on to the next subject. Right. Order, order. Call Kevin Foster to move the motion.
Well, thank you, Mr. Betts, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I beg to move that this House has considered the duty solicitor scheme. In preparing for this debate, I've been particularly grateful to Rob Newman, a retired solicitor who lives in my constituency, and Tony Steiner, the Chief Executive of the Devon and Somerset Law Society, for their thoughts and guidance on this subject when preparing my thoughts that I'll be expressing today. Mr. Betts, it would be easy to try and characterise this as debate about those accused of crimes and their representatives, but it goes much deeper. Today's debate is about a key part of how we deliver justice and truly serve victims of crime. The duty solicitor schemes provide essential representation for suspects at police stations. They allow investigations to move forward quickly and are critical to ensuring victims and defendants get justice. An effective duty solicitor scheme is vital to properly functioning law enforcement, allowing the police to more quickly decide if they have grounds for further investigation and a possible charging decision, or if the person they have detained is not the person they are looking for and can be quickly released, or even if the matters themselves are not criminal matters that therefore can be discontinued. This process ensures our courts can then deliver a fair trial based on evidence from an effective and timely police interview. Victims can then see justice done in a timely and effective way, whilst good legal advice at the earliest stages can also be absolutely vital for avoiding miscarriages of justice, examples of which we've been debating quite regularly in this House over the last 2 to 3 months. So if this duty solicitor service fails, then our justice system fails. Police interviews are delayed, victims find themselves waiting longer for justice, which may never come if the issues with the duty solicitor scheme are not addressed. Let's start with the current situation. Mr. Betts, across England and Wales, duty solicitor schemes are in crisis. Since 2017, over 1,400 duty solicitors have left the duty rota system, and many schemes have less than 7 members, making 24/7 coverage near impossible. And this makes no allowance for sickness or for a wish to take annual leave. This creates a vicious cycle of duty rota obligations, which are likely to push even more out of the profession. You know, we should remember that a core part of this is having someone available to, for example, attend a police station interview in the early hours of the morning. This isn't just about attending court during the day. Now, to give the figures for my own region, in Devon and Cornwall, back in 2017, there was 109 duty solicitors operating. By last year, that was 78, 28% down, and the 2027 forecast is 64. The 2027 forecast for Devon and Cornwall brings home it's not just the numbers leaving the duty scheme which bring a need for change. The lack of an attractive package for those at the start of their career to join the duty solicitor scheme and for others to stay means that those who remain on the duty rota are ageing. Nationally, fewer than 4% of duty solicitors are under 35 years old, and the average age in 2021 was 49. You know, if still working in the sector, I'd be feeling very youthful at the moment. And it is higher in many regions. I'm happy to do so.
I spoke to him before we come in today. In 2018, the Law Society stated that there was a chronic shortage of duty solicitors, as you said, with nearly half of them being over 50 and due to retire soon. In addition, more than a third of all junior solicitors in Northern Ireland are now employed in large firms. Does the honourable member agree that more needs to be done to encourage junior solicitors to take up positions within legal aid schemes to ensure that those who cannot afford to choose a solicitor have readily available access within police stations and indeed within the courts as well?
Well, thank you, Mr Betts. I think I can only agree with my friend, the member for Strangford, and in particular, as he says, about getting people to want to come into this particular area of legal aid. There are some issues around legal aid more generally, but this is a particular one because of the links to police station interviews, police station duty, the right to representation to police station, that create challenges that are very different to, for example, providing legal aid work in plan settings around the courts and perhaps around particular timing and advice. This is literally, getting a phone call in the early hours of the morning to say, can you come and attend an interview immediately, and literally with someone being in custody whilst waiting for you to attend. So, no, there is a need to look at the position of getting more people coming into it. And I think one of the things that the overall figures don't show is actually how stark the facts are in some regions. And there are literally 0 practising criminal law solicitors and working in this system aged under 35 in Cornwall, Lincolnshire, Wiltshire or Worcestershire. And if we just think about that for a moment, Mr Betts, that means not one person who started their legal career in the last 12 years is practising as a criminal law solicitor in those 4 counties. Other areas are very close to this figure, with only 1 criminal law solicitor aged under 35 in each of Norfolk, Shropshire and Warwickshire. Meanwhile, in Bristol, Cornwall, Devon, East Sussex, Lincolnshire, Wiltshire and Worcestershire, over 60% of criminal law solicitors are aged over 50. The result is, with expected retirements, rotas will shrink even further, to the point where there's simply no one left to take part. Now, the National Audit Office recently highlighted that the response has been slow to the market sustainability issues, and I know the Law Society of England and Wales echoes this view. We simply cannot wait until the final generation of criminal lawyers retires to start tackling this issue, not least as those starting law degrees today will be at least 5 years away from being able to fully practice. This means to tackle the issue of people retiring in 5 years' time, we need to start now. Now, the issue of the duty solicitor scheme also links to what is one of the biggest achievements of Boris Johnson's premiership, putting in place plans to recruit an additional 20,000 police officers as part of the National Uplift programme, which have now been delivered. Extra police officers, of course, mean more issues dealt with, more crimes detected, more suspects to be interviewed, and more cases before the courts. It is estimated, based on a National Audit Office report, that an extra 729,000 cases could be set to enter the criminal justice system by 2030 because of the extra 20,000 police officers. Now, I accept a lot of those will not necessarily require full police interviews, some may be dealt with via other forms of disposal. But it's still quite a thought of what the extra demand. And what happens if a police station cannot find a duty solicitor? Well, the first is the police may be forced to release a suspect as they cannot interview them without a legal representative. This may mean that the freshness of evidence might be lost, or even the potential for early admissions, which can make the process a lot easier for victims, may similarly be lost. Of course, the pressure builds on police station cells and local court backlogs if they're waiting for a duty solicitor to attend, and victims will be forced to wait longer for justice. And we may even find innocent bystanders who've been arrested in error will have to wait longer before they can be released. And the impact continues once the case gets to court. Nearly half the defendants appearing in the magistrates' courts on imprisonable summary offences did not have legal representation recorded on their case in the first half of 2023, this rising from 35% during 2022. Now, one response to the current situation has been consolidation, with criminal defence lawyers and practice becoming, shall we say, specialist firms rather than being departments of larger multidisciplinary teams. But this is not without its own issues. As one criminal defence solicitor working within the South West region put it, the truth is that the local rota is reduced to 9 or 10 people grouped in 4 firms. The 4 firms are crime only, and there are no mixed practices who do any duty work or any quantity of criminal work. The consequence of this is that each solicitor has a 24-hour duty slot every 10 days, as well as the duty slots at the court 4 days per week and remand duties over video link 5 days per week, which means there is some duty every day. Now, it's not clear this is particularly physically sustainable, but consolidation has also produced another impact, which may be less visible. And this is stated as another difficulty is when conflicts come up, as once the 4 firms available are used up, if there is a 5th defendant on the case, then there's no one they can actually seek advice from within the area. And therefore they're starting to see justice deserts in various parts of the country, including my own. Also, consolidation will produce the removal of any form of choice. And most people accept there's going to be wide choice around legal aid. The ability, particularly when your liberty is on the line, to have some choice is still important. Now, Mr. Betts, it's easy to outline problems, but we also do need to look at solutions. And in the short term, we do need to stop experienced lawyers leaving duty work for other more rewarding areas of legal practice or simply to areas where they don't have to have the rota obligations. And as the Law Society has pointed out, criminal legal aid rates have not really increased since the mid-1990s, whilst most other areas of law have been able to determine their rate based on the market. Now, the Minister will know back in 2022, the independent review of criminal legal aid took place. However, the government rejected its central recommendation of an immediate increase in rates of 15% as the first step, instead implementing a 9% rise that will eventually rise to 11%. Since then, practitioners have continued to leave the system, and it doesn't appear to have produced a particular recovery in duty solicitor numbers. And I know the Minister will be aware of the judicial review and its findings back in January, and in which it found that the response had been irrational and should be retaken. Now, to halt the decline and the potential collapse of the system, it's clear that the government must implement the recommendations of the report. And this also needs to be done considering the impact of inflation on the profession since the report was published back in 2021. And it should be noted that criminal legal aid firms undertake a range of work, so therefore it should be done as a package rather than individual items. But even that won't change the longer-term picture. What we need quite clearly is a strategy to make working in our criminal justice system more rewarding, and specific measures to encourage those learning law at university to train for the duty solicitor scheme when they graduate. You know, there's not time in this debate to go into all the nuanced details that might be brought about by the creation of a public defender system, akin to the Crown Prosecution Service, which effectively was a nationalisation of prosecution of work. It's not a simple thing to do, and it could be fraught with challenges, in particular how you ensure it maintains its independence from the state, who of course is pursuing criminal charges against the individuals seeking to be represented. And also, like with the current duty solicitor scheme, it could find itself struggling to attract the resources it needs and the human capital as well for those who wish to take part in it. Yet the government should consider how it can incentivise new lawyers to train specifically for criminal law work, especially police station and duty solicitor roles. Mr. Betts, given what I have already outlined, there are some specific points I'd appreciate hearing the Minister's responses to. The first is, what is the government's planned response to the recent High Court ruling and its clear findings on the duty solicitor scheme? Second, will the government recognise the crisis in the duty solicitor scheme and put in place the fee increases its own commission review has said is needed to prevent the system's collapse? Third, given the urgent need to get more training for this work to prevent the rota disappearing over the coming decade, has the Minister given thought to incentives like a Golden Hello package or a funded training package, which could then come with requirements to be on the rota for a set number of years, as we see, for example, in the armed forces or other areas of public service, where people are funded to be trained for an issue, to do a particular job, they then have to accept a commitment to do it to public benefit. And also how, finally, with few entering the professional recent years, how will it support training being undertaken to ensure there's a capacity as well, while still having criminal lawyers delivering the rota? Mr. Betts, as someone who once worked as a criminal lawyer funded by legal aid, there is a lot more I could say about this issue, but time is limited. I said at the start, the duty solicitor scheme lies at the heart of our criminal justice system. It cannot operate without it, yet it is ageing and seeing more people leave. I say to the Minister, this is about ensuring victims can get timely justice, miscarriages avoided, and cases can proceed quickly and effectively for the benefit of all involved. Without urgent investment and action on our duty solicitor scheme, none of these things can happen.
The question is, this House has considered the duty solicitor scheme. Minister to respond.
Thank you, Mr Betts. It's a pleasure to serve under you this morning. And can I start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Torbay, for securing this debate and the focus on this very important matter. And I'd like to begin by commending the criminal legal aid solicitors for the invaluable work they do across the whole of the criminal justice system. Legal aid is a fundamental pillar of our free and fair justice system. It underpins the rule of law so that ordinary citizens can uphold their rights and liberties. In the criminal justice system, it supports those charged with an offence to defend themselves and ensures the allegations made against them are properly tested. Criminal legal aid solicitors play a vital role in ensuring the system works. It might be helpful, Mr Betts, that if I could just explain that in England and Wales, there are two duty solicitor schemes which operate in parallel. The police station duty solicitor scheme enables a person who is arrested on suspicion of a criminal offence to consult with a solicitor free of charge, either in person or on the telephone whilst in police custody. The court duty solicitor scheme allows a person who has already been charged with an offence to consult with and be represented by a solicitor free of charge at the magistrates' court on their first appearance if they do not have or simply have not contacted their own solicitor. If I could just turn to the funding for solicitors, we have boosted the system with immediate investment in response to the Criminal Legal Aid Independent Review, known as CLARE, and are introducing further reforms which will support solicitors. Access to justice is a fundamental right, and in 2023 we spent £1.86 billion on legal aid, of which £873 million was on crime, and investment in the legal aid sector is continuing. In September 2022, we uplifted most criminal legal aid fee schemes by 15%, and this included a 15% increase to the police station scheme and the magistrates' court scheme, which includes youth court work. And this was in direct response to CLARE to support and strengthen the criminal legal aid sector. If I may, Mr Betts, give some glimmer of hope to my honourable friend, in that since we introduced the fee scheme and the new standard crime contract came into force, we have seen an increase in the number of duty solicitors registering for the scheme. And in fact, since about October 2022 to April 23, the numbers of duty solicitors has risen by about 7.5%. Now, whilst I accept that is not taken the numbers to where it were several years ago, it is early signs that we have at least seen some stabilisation in the scheme. Of course.
For giving way. Would he commit, and rather than perhaps suggest he does it in the time he's got now, would he commit to write to me, setting out, perhaps place a copy of the letter in the library, setting out where the numbers have changed in each region as defined by the areas that are covered in the duty rota schemes?
If I can break it down by region, I'll give a full response, but certainly the figures I've got available I will happily share and place a copy in the library. So, as I said, Mr Betts, whilst not completely getting to numbers that we've seen in the past, it has perhaps suggested that we've seen some stabilisation of the duty solicitor scheme. And on the 29th of January this year, we published a consultation on proposed reforms to the police station fee scheme and the youth court fees, where an additional £21.1 million per year has been allocated. And we expect our reforms to criminal legal aid will increase investment in the solicitor profession by about £85 million every year. And this includes a 30% increase in funding for solicitors' work in police stations, and a 20% increase for their work in magistrates' courts once we introduce the additional £21 million a year. This investment, alongside planned longer-term reforms, increases criminal legal aid spending by up to £141 million a year, which means the overall spend for criminal legal aid is expected to be up to £1.2 billion per year. This is the highest level of investment in criminal legal aid in a decade. This additional funding into the system will help contribute towards the sustainability of the market and help ensure legal aid is accessible in the future. If I could address the concerns about the reduction in the number of duty solicitors, notwithstanding the increase we've seen recently, I do accept those concerns. I share them. And I meet regularly with the Legal Aid Agency to discuss matters pertaining to criminal legal aid, and including the duty solicitor schemes. The Legal Aid Agency regularly reviews and monitors the number of duty solicitors on each local duty scheme to make sure there is adequate provision and access to legal aid. They have arrangements in place to ensure all duty rosters have cover 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I do accept that in some areas that is sometimes quite a tight ask, but the Legal Aid Agency do work quite closely with practitioners to ensure that we try and provide coverage in those areas where it is tight, of course.
Thank you, Minister, for giving way again. In terms of numbers, just to be clear, this is people who are actually actively taking cases. The reason why is there's one retired solicitor, when they knew I had the debate, shared the fact that he still gets an email each year saying he's actually still licensed to do stuff, even though he hasn't actually practiced in 10 years as a criminal lawyer. That's people actively doing things.
My understanding, I will have to double check, my understanding is that those who are on the standard crime, the numbers that I have that are shown are those that have signed up for the standard crime contract. So I'm not sure whether a retired solicitor would be actually having signed the contract. So that kind of individual would not or should not be captured in the figures that I have. But I do want to reassure my honourable friend that whilst the number of solicitors firms offering criminal legal aid and the officers delivering the service has declined, police station and court duty solicitor schemes have remained fully covered. I personally am slightly less worried about the number of officers. I think sometimes we can get fixated about appreciating more rural areas. Having a physical office is important, but in other parts of the country, with mergers of firms, I don't believe we need to get hung up about physical presence as long as we have, if you like, the solicitors on the ground. So that, for me, is a bigger measure rather than the number of offices that are in place. Of course.
I agree with him on physical office locations, not least in an issue of homework, era of homework and other things. But actually, it's not so much about a physical location of an office. If a firm merges up, you still get the potential for conflicts, and the issue was given in terms of Devon. If there's 4 firms that are doing this work, and there's five defendants with potential for so-called cutthroat defence, if I can put it that way, that then doesn't change that issue. It's not about whether they've got a physical office, it's the fact that if they're together as teams, as firms, that can start seeing conflicts arise.
My honourable friend, being a practicing solicitor, has greater knowledge of the intricacies than I, but I will take that point on board. But I can assure him that the provision of duty solicitors is a priority, and we are actively taking steps to ensure that all schemes continue to operate both now and in the future. If I could just touch on a couple of points that my honourable friend mentioned. Turning to the judicial review, that has concluded, and the judicial review related to the funding for criminal solicitors. Now, a year ago, as my old friend mentioned, the Law Society filed a GR claim challenging the funding decision taken by the previous Lord Chancellor in response to the CLAR. This was mostly focused on the litigator's graduated fee scheme, known as LGFS, and the decision not to apply the full 15% uplift across all elements of the scheme. LGFS is a remuneration scheme for solicitors undertaking Crown Court work. We were clear in our response to CLAR why we didn't increase the fees for pages of prosecution evidence. This was due to the perverse incentives identified by CLAR, where payments are based primarily on the volume of pages served to the prosecution, irrespective of whether the pages are read, and not on the work done. Now, Mr. Betts, the judgment was handed down on the 1st of January, and whilst the claimants were successful on a specific narrow grounds relating to the decision-making process, the majority of their arguments were rejected by the court. We are carefully considering the judgment and will respond in due course. Furthermore, we are currently working with stakeholders through a subgroup of the Criminal Legal Aid Advisory Board, known as CLARB, towards reform of the LGFS. And one aim of the reform is to address the perverse incentives of PPE identified by CLAR. And we're aiming to consult on LGFS reform later this year. And if I just could, at this stage, answer the point about the number of younger practitioners in the sector. I understand the concern, and that's why the chair of CLARB, Her Honour Deborah Taylor, did ask if we could increase the numbers on the board to include younger practitioners, both at the criminal bar and in the solicitor sector, and that has been agreed. So the younger voices of the sector are on CLARB, and hopefully that will help inform the decisions as what we need to do to ensure there is a flow of younger solicitors into the criminal side of the criminal justice system in terms of representation. If I may also just turn on to one of the issues that my honourable friend also raised in terms of ensuring that we, if you like, that crime pays on training. I accept the point that we do seem to have a revolving door where particularly firms of solicitors will invest in the training of training solicitors, and once completed will then leave and move on to different parts of the criminal justice system. That is something that we are very conscious of, and I know that Her Honour Deborah Taylor, the Chair of CLARB, is looking at what we can do to change how training is funded, see if we can address that revolving door. Obviously, that is still a piece of work in progress, and the sector is also being consulted on. I think, have I answered all the questions that my honourable friend raised? He's welcome to intervene if I've missed anything. Yes,
the Minister's been very generous and is actually inviting interventions. He'll know that I sometimes hear with interest the words "in due course." It's a common one. It's amazing what that can cover. Could you perhaps give me a flavour of the timelines for work on the response that perhaps has been set? So, for example, would he be aiming to publish it by the summer? I hear what he says around training as well. Would he be perhaps setting, because we've got academic years are obviously quite vital in terms of this particular area, and new ones start each September. Has he set himself a particular timeline for the work to be done to then allow him to respond in due course?
Mr. Betts, my honourable friend raised a very good point that the Criminal Legal Aid Advisory Board doesn't work to my timeline, and so, but I will contact Her Honour Deborah Taylor to see if she's able to share a timeline of when some thoughts, at least if some initial thoughts, if not a final report, would be made available. But I think it's true to say that we do have a shared aim of achieving a system that fairly reflects the work of our excellent legal professionals, that we have a sustainable criminal legal aid system well into the future. We do appreciate that the system is under pressure, and we want to ensure that the system is robust and that people have access to justice. Mr. Betts, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to respond to this debate and to the points raised by my honourable friend, and I hope that he's found the answers I've given at least helpful and informative.
The question is this House to consider the duty solicitor scheme. Many to that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.